Dear Nintendo, or should I say Pokemon Company, what happened to the promise of Pokemon? So I'm 38. I'll be 39 later this year. Pokemon Red came out in North America around 1998. So I was about 13 years old at the time. In fact, I had just turned 13 earlier that same month, that Christmas, that December. And my sister got me one of those big boxes. It looks like it's going to be a big gift, but it's actually a bunch of little boxes with different things in it to throw you off. And at the core of it, this sweet nougat center was the best game I had ever played. It was fantastic. It came at a great time, not just in my childhood, but obviously the collective childhood of a lot of people globally. And really, the fantasy is big open fields, animals, collecting, tournaments, gyms. But really, the eve of all of us as we go into middle school and high school, constantly being pestered and peppered with questions from relatives, friends, elders, even sometimes some peers. What are you going to do for the rest of your life, right? And Pokemon answers that with a resounding, you never have to work again because the work can become play, right? So it's kind of the hidden fantasy of Pokemon, the psychology of it. And then there's another element too, which is that when you participate in any form of art, what you're doing is you're communicating both images, words, sounds, and you're allowing the viewer, the user, the gamer, the reader, what have you, to fill in the blanks, okay? And what that really means is their imagination, right? So when something really ambitious came out for a handheld like Game Boy, a lot of things are implied, right? You're not actually seeing big flowing fields. You're seeing icons, images that are supposed to invoke that feeling. And music helps elevate the experience and kind of set a tone. And then, of course, there's also an anime that came out, right? A Saturday morning cartoon, like the catchiest opening song, by the way, like an anthem for a whole generation territory, to help, once again, fill in more of the blanks, right? And so this becomes a merchandise darling. We all know this. You don't need to hear the history of Pokemon from me. But the root problem is that the fantasy has not become a reality, okay? So, and there's reasons. I mean, Pokemon Company is owned by 3 different companies. Nintendo only owns 1/3. The other 2/3 are owned by Game Freak and Creatures Incorporated, if memory serves. And that's okay, but they have merchandised this IP to the point of, I would just say, almost borderline madness, because there are so many different things that you have Pokemon involved between the trading cards and Pokemon Go, like a Netflix stop motion about a paradise hotel that you can go to and so on, manga, comic books, the full 9 yards, right? But the core series is really aimed at little children. And that's been a core design decision, I think, from the beginning. And there really doesn't seem to be any end in sight, which is another reason why the parody game Pal World, that takes it one step further, not only makes it quote unquote, I'm putting quotations around this because when I say adult or mature, it really means one of two things, either like inappropriate, right, or actually mature, right? And so there really is a distinction between the two. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people growing up on Game of Thrones have lost that distinction because they conflate the two. But the reality is there are things that are more adult than a child can understand because they have not lived. And then there are things that are just inappropriate because you're also a child, right? And it's an adult's responsibility to keep that away from them. Anyway, we won't go too deep into the weeds or the high grass. Pokemon Legends comes out, a tech demo that got disguised as a spin-off game that was a public beta test to see and to judge where the Pokemon community is in terms of those evolutions in gameplay mechanics, because it feels like a tech demo. It doesn't feel like a complete package. There's things are missing. Menus are bare bones. The core concept is kind of there, but it's super buggy. There's virtually nothing going on in the world. The animals are there. They're on the map. And you've heard 1,000 people make other videos. Just when I was making this video and dragging my feet this year, I saw 3 or 4 other people make a video about Monolith Soft, the devs for the Xenoblade series. And some of them were even brought in at late development for Pokemon Legends follow-up because, it's a side game to the main line. And it was too late. It was too late in the production. The previous mainline titles, Pokemon Shield and Sword, once again, if memory serves, were basically three-dimensional upgrades over the handhelds with locked isometric camera in cities and towns, and only had one open region. Once again, like a free bonus DVD that came with a game subscription magazine in the 90s or early 2000s. It didn't feel like it was actually part of the game. It felt like a teaser for a future release, because it was clear that as a company, they weren't looking at this new piece of hardware like 3 or 4 years in the future and planning a massive release. It was like, in hindsight, like, okay, I guess we got to start pivoting and making this into a Switch game, right? So not well received, and rightfully so. But then we get Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and it's broken. I have a copy of it on my Switch, and I refuse to play it because I saw some of the worst jank in a first party. And it's not really a first party. That's what makes it so wild. It's like a 1.5 party. It's like a second party video game for Nintendo because of their ownership of the IP that I've ever seen. I mean, we're talking about like the kids are fragmenting and they're pixelating in their movement, and they're in a small confined space in a classroom. Right? The eyes are stretching out, or the Pokemon doesn't have the right textures loading in when it comes out. It's really bad. Like, someone at Nintendo should have told Pokemon Company, this is unacceptable, and we would be ashamed as a company to release this. We will not allow you to release this in this state on our platform, and we will make a public statement, even if it comes at the detriment of Pokemon Company in the short term, to tell them that we are extremely dissatisfied with the quality of this software release at this time, and thus will not be able to release it and will not allow it to be released until it is functional. And Nintendo lost a lot, and I'm saying this both to Nintendo and to Pokemon Company and to all those who should care and to all of us, the fans and the consumers. That was a really disappointing moment for all of us. I love Nintendo with all my heart. I've been playing Nintendo games since I was 3. My sister had a console. It was my first console by extension. Super Mario Brothers, Tetris. These were my first games. They were on a NES, right? And I lost a lot of respect for Nintendo. And I know there's probably a more complicated situation happening in the background, but I gotta tell you, I really don't care, right? There's a part of me that's like, that is really Nintendo's responsibility. That's Nintendo's problem. The Switch 2 just got announced, and the Switch 2 is going to be super expensive. And I'm totally willing to squirrel away the money to buy it, to support them as a company, because I know based on inflation, NES games were anywhere between 30 to 50, and some rare occasions 60 back in 1986 when I was born. So by inflation, the games should really be like $83 to $134 each. So $80 for the games makes sense in 2025. We've been in a recession and had an incredible amount of inflation globally since the pandemic in 2018, but you can't be releasing broken software, okay? And now I'm finding out that we're going to get a mandatory free update for Scarlet and Violet for the Nintendo Switch 2 that will be free. Yeah, it's going to be free. You released a broken game. It's the least you can do for us. And so once again, I end this by just reminding everybody, the fantasy of Pokemon is to go out into a lush, big open world. Think lots of nature with beautiful homesteads, frontier towns, meeting random, interesting people along the way. The series has never had complex missions the way that let's say like Witcher 3 or things like that, but it would be nice to see that as part of the evolution of the series. It'd be wonderful, like the Xenoblade Saga, it'd be wonderful to see big open stretches with animals living in it with even more complex ecosystems. That's really up to them to do. And I just say, dear Nintendo, what happened to the promise of Pokemon?